At the end of World War II, a series of war crimes trials occurred, bringing the former members of the Third Reich's government and hierarchy to justice. There were a number of death sentences handed out, and these were carried out on the 16th of October 1946 at the hands of an American executioner. Things did not go well, as even before the first trapdoor was sprung, the most high-profile defendant, Hermann Göring, the former head of the Luftwaffe and Reichsmarshal, had died by his own hand, hours before he was to go to the gallows. Things continued in a rather disorganised manner, and the executioner that day, a man named John C. Woods, bungled and botched his way through the 10 men's executions. Woods would go down in history for his work that day, but for the wrong reasons. There was one execution in particular carried out on that day inside of Nuremberg Prison's gymnasium, which was especially brutal, and Woods had to even disappear behind the curtain and finish this man off. It was a rather fitting end for a man who was regarded as one of the most evil Nazis of the Third Reich, and Julius Streicher's work inside of Nazi Germany had led to the persecution of so many. But how did his execution go so badly wrong, and what specifically happened with it? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Julius Streicher was born in 1885 inside of a Bavarian town, and he began his working career as a teacher. But then he worked inside of administration in Nuremberg, and as the First World War broke out, Streicher enlisted and joined the German army. He served on the front lines for the complete conflict, and he was awarded many medals for his service and bravery, but Streicher then, after the war, began to seek a more political career. He joined right-wing groups and would speak out and launch ruthless anti-Semitic tirades at meetings, and he became a very feared man in the local area because of his opinions. He also helped to form the Nuremberg branch of the German Socialist Party, and in 1922 he urged those who followed him to join what became the Nazi Party, and Streicher was considered one of the Nazi Old Guard and one of the first members. Inside of the Nazi Party, Streicher found a platform for his anti-Semitism and his ruthless ideas. He would in 1923 launch Der Stürmer, his anti-Semitic newspaper that attacked many different groups. He was also part of the Munich Putsch, Hitler's failed revolution inside of Munich, and he was suspended from his teaching job, and he would found a small Nazi group after the party was banned, and he then held a seat in Parliament in Bavaria. Streicher was later made a Gauleiter and a local leader inside of Middle Franconia, and he was responsible for boosting the Nazis' profile. He continued to publish Der Stürmer, and each week millions of people were exposed to his Nazi newspaper, which was producing brutal cartoons and stories that led to more persecution and suffering. He also helped organise boycotts of Jewish businesses, but continued to produce further publications which were brutal, including horrific children's books. He and Hitler were close friends, and had been for some years, but inside of the inner circle some were concerned that Streicher was unprofessional, and he often ranted like a crazed person, and they were very concerned that his relationship with Hitler would damage the Führer's reputation. But Streicher would fight back against some inside of the inner circle, and Der Stürmer, his newspaper, in 1939, published a story against Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe and the Reichsmarshal, and in this he alleged that Göring's daughter was not actually his, she being created through artificial insemination, and this enraged Göring, and he went to Hitler to have Streicher dismissed. He was actually brought in front of the Supreme Party Court for this, and was said to have been unsuitable for leadership, due to the allegations against Göring and other high-ranking Nazis who had complained about him. He was on the 16th of February 1940 stripped of his party offices, and was then quietly kept in the shadows of the Nazi Party. He continued to use the title of a Gauleiter, but also continued to publish Der Stürmer, but in secret Hitler did keep a close friendship with Julius Streicher. The Führer considered him a loyal and long-time friend, but at the end of the war the Allies would catch up with the ruthless editor of Der Stürmer. In May 1945, Julius Streicher was captured inside of an Austrian town by a group of American soldiers, and he chose not to end his own life, believing he would be spared any punishment. He was someone who, let's remember, hadn't killed anyone, but he was an important cog in perpetuating the horrific persecution inside of Nazi Germany. Streicher was taken to the International Military Tribunal, or the Nuremberg Trials as it was more commonly known, for his crimes, and a lot of evidence against him was collected, including the speeches he had made and also the articles he had published. He was said to have been an accessory to murder because of his fiery speeches and publications, and for this he was actually sentenced to death. He was acquitted of crimes against peace, but was condemned for being found guilty of crimes against humanity. The judgment in the courtroom read, "For his 25 years of speaking, writing and preaching hatred, Streicher was widely known as Jew Beta No. 1. In his speeches and articles, week after week, month after month, he infected the German mind with the virus of anti-Semitism and incited the German people to active persecution." Streicher's incitement to murder and extermination at the time, when Jews in the East were being killed under the most horrible conditions, clearly constitutes persecution on political and racial grounds in connection with war crimes, as defined by the Charter, and constitutes as crimes against humanity. After the court had outlined the guilty charges for those who did stand at the Nuremberg trials, the plans were then made for their executions. These took place on the 16th of October 1946, early in the morning, and the American Army were the ones who would carry them out. For this, an executioner, John C. Woods, was summoned to carry out the executions of the Nuremberg Nazis, including Julius Streicher. Woods was someone who had lied to get his job as an executioner, possibly to escape the front lines of the battlefields, and he had previously been diagnosed with constitutional psychopathic inferiority without psychosis. He had no previous experience in hanging before World War II, and he was accepted as a hangman by the army for some reason. Much of the executions he carried out before Nuremberg also went very wrong, as the drops were incorrectly calculated, and this led to many of the men slowly strangling to death. Death should have occurred within a matter of a few minutes, or the neck should have been snapped, but this rarely happened with Woods. Also, the gallows that had been created for the Nuremberg trials and executions must have been done rather hastily. There were 3 of these made, but the trapdoor on each was too small for the men to fall through cleanly, meaning they lost the velocity of their drop when they fell through. Also, some of the men smashed their faces on the side of the trapdoor when the lever was released, and they were left bloodied by this. The trapdoor also did not latch when it was released, meaning it also flung back and hit the defendants as they went through, which gave them a large whack on the head for good luck, also leading to them bleeding. But the biggest botches were, as mentioned, caused by the improper drop, needed to bring life to an end quickly. Some of the executions took place over 15 minutes, and one took almost 30 minutes. It was not quick work, despite what John C. Woods, the executioner, would later claim. Julius Streicher was executed 7th of the 10 men that day, and because of the prolonged execution ordeal, he was one of the only executed Nazis whose time of death was not recorded and is declared as unknown because of the chaos in the chamber. His execution did not go well, and he went down kicking and screaming. Now we're going to turn to an eyewitness who saw the proceedings, and he claimed, Julius Streicher made his melodramatic appearance at 2:12 a.m. While his manacles were being removed and his bare hands bound, this ugly dwarfish little man, wearing a threadbare suit and a well-worn bluish shirt, buttoned to the neck but without a tie, who was notorious during his days in power for his flashy dress, glanced at the 3 wooden scaffolds rising menacingly in front of him. Then he glanced around the room, his eyes resting momentarily upon the small group of witnesses. By this time his hands were tied securely behind his back. 2 guards, one on each arm, directed him to number 1 gallows on the left of the entrance. He walked steadily the 6 feet to the first wooden step, but his face was twitching. As the guard stopped him at the bottom of the steps for identification formality, he uttered his piercing scream, Heil Hitler. The shriek sent a shiver down my back. As its echo died away, an American colonel standing by the steps said sharply, "Ask the man his name." In response to the interpreter's query, Streicher shouted, "You know my name well." The interpreter repeated his request, and the condemned man yelled, "Julius Streicher." As he reached the platform, Streicher cried out, "Now it goes to God." He was pushed the last 2 steps to the mortal spot beneath the hangman's rope. The rope was held back against the wooden rail by the hangman. Suddenly he screamed another anti-Semitic slur. An American officer standing at the scaffold said, "Ask the man if he has any last words." When the interpreter had translated, Streicher shouted, "The Bolsheviks will hang you one day." When the black hood was raised over his head, Streicher's muffled voice could be heard to say, "Adele, my dear wife." At that instant the trap opened with a loud bang. He went down kicking. When the rope snapped taut, with the body swinging wildly, groans could be heard from within the concealed interior of the scaffold. Finally the hangman, who had descended from the gallows platform, lifted the black canvas curtain and went inside. Something happened that put a stop to the groans and brought the rope to a standstill. After it was over, I was not in the mood to ask what he did, but I assumed that he grabbed the swinging body and pulled down on it. We were all in the opinion that Streicher had strangled. What had happened was that Julius Streicher went through the trapdoor, and the drop of the rope had not been enough to kill him. What had happened was that as Julius Streicher went through the trapdoor, the drop of the rope had not been enough to kill him. The drop was not calculated well based on his height and weight, and the witnesses could hear the moans coming from behind the curtain, hiding his swinging body. Woods then, seeing this, disappeared inside of the scaffold to bring Streicher's life to an end, and the witnesses could see the swinging of the rope from the top of the gallows, but when Woods went behind the curtain, the rope stopped swinging. What the executioner had done was to pull down on the swinging body of Julius Streicher to halt the rope, but he also pulled down on the body and choked the life out of the former editor of Der Stürmer, being the one who brought his life to an end there and then. There were no more noises after this, and later Streicher was cut down, but all of those who witnessed knew that Streicher had been finished off by Woods. Those who were inside of the chamber knew that Julius Streicher did not die from spinal severing, which was intended, but by the strangling performed by John C. Woods. His execution was one of those that went wrong in the early morning of the 16th of October 1946 within Nuremberg prison's gymnasium. Streicher went to his death an ardent Nazi, and someone who had no sympathy for the victims of his crimes. His remains were later cremated, and his ashes were scattered in the Isar River, but the editor of Der Stürmer and close friend of Adolf Hitler had a very messy death at the hands of a bungling executioner. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.